Welcome to the People Teaching People podcast. Joining me on the podcast is Fede Vargas. Fede and I met at PodSummit YYC 2024, a 2-day podcasting event all about learning, storytelling, and building community and connections, which was held in Calgary, Alberta this past September. Fede was one of the speakers at the event, and his session was called Unconventional Paths, Redefining Success Through Podcasting. I'm really looking forward to this conversation and for the opportunity for you all to learn more about Fede. Fede Vargas is the founder and creator of My Most Authentic Life. With over 15 years of experience in sales and distribution within the media and entertainment industry, Fede founded My Most Authentic Life, a platform and podcast dedicated to exploring big changes and unconventional paths. Fede has established leadership in podcasting, taking the stage at the world's leading podcasting events, including Podcast Movement Evolutions in Los Angeles and PodSummit YYC 2024. Born in Mexico and raised in Canada, Fede brings a global perspective to his work, having lived in Europe and traveled extensively across Asia Pacific and Latin America. Fluent in both English and Spanish, he now resides in Toronto, Canada. Fede graduated from the Podcast Incubator at Stony Brook University in New York, the Screenwriting Residency at the Canadian Film Centre, and holds a degree from the Creative School at Toronto Metropolitan University. Hi, Fede. It's so nice to have you here. Thank you for joining me today.
Tiana, I'm so happy to be here.
So where I always like to start is with a person's story. So that's where I want to start with you. And I'm curious about the journey that brought you to where you are today and how you ended up doing the types of work that you're doing now.
That's a great question, Tiana. And if you had told me at the end of 2019 that I would have a personal growth podcast all about authenticity, I wouldn't have believed it. It was a perfect storm of pandemic factors that led me here. I got laid off at the peak of the pandemic, which ended a very long and successful 15 plus year career selling content within the media and entertainment industry. And the worst possible thing, eventually, as it usually does with life, became the best possible thing. I relocated to Mexico, to Playa del Carmen, and a 4-week holiday to retool and get my CV in order and jump right back on the hamster wheel. Turned into 2 years. And during that process, My Most Authentic Life, the podcast, was born.
It's such an interesting story. And I know that when we first connected, I got to hear a little bit about it at PodSummit, but it is so true. Sometimes, well, generally all the time, when we look back at some of those more difficult, challenging times in our life, we can see how it sort of led or created a trajectory for where we are now. Now, it was absolutely lovely to connect and meet you at PodSummit in Calgary back in September. And I know that you have spoken at a number of podcasting events, including Podcast Movement, along with PodSummit. And I'm wondering, what are some of your biggest takeaways from those experiences and maybe how they've influenced you in terms of both podcasting, but also beyond podcasting?
Yes, the power of those events is the community building. And something that happened along my journey was that as I took that career break in Mexico and started the podcast DIY, taught myself how to do it on YouTube, I had forgotten about how important these industry events are, because in my previous life, I attended a lot. And then one day, as I realized, I really love what I'm doing and I want to raise my game and I want to take this seriously, there must be a conference, right? There must be other people like me that want to congregate. And of course there was. And so that's how I discovered Podcast Movement. I almost didn't go last minute. I said, keep taking risks. You got to keep going if you're going to take it seriously. And that opened up so many doors just by showing up, just by getting in the room was so crucial, because the podcasting community is so welcoming and everybody's willing to help and give advice. And that's how you keep growing.
Yeah, I would absolutely agree. So Pod Summit was my very first time of collectively sort of gathering with a group of people who are excited about all things podcasting, and leaving my basement where I'm sitting right now felt like literally walking up my basement stairs and finding this amazing space and community of people who are into podcasting and from different sort of angles and looking
Yeah.
at it in different ways. And I'm so glad that, like yourself, I looked for and was able to attend something where there were people interested in the same sort of thing that I was, but also a chance to learn so much. Now, I had the privilege of attending your session at Pod Summit. So your talk was titled Unconventional Paths, Redefining Success Through Podcasting. So obviously there will be people listening who weren't able to be in the room with you that day. I'm wondering if you could share some of the key messages from your talk. And maybe if you were to pick one, what would have been sort of the main takeaway that you would have wanted people to walk away with?
Yes, I had so much fun giving that presentation, but it was also the first time I gave that talk titled in quite that way. And it was so interesting the way the name has come about and at what point in my journey that's come about, because in a lot of ways, Unconventional Paths, Redefining Success Through Podcasting is everything that I do. It permeates through every part of my story. That was a very deeply personal presentation because it brought you to the core of what drives someone to pursue meaningful change in their lives, right? What drives people to re-examine, to reassess, to re-engineer everything that they've known, to burn all the shoulds in your life, to wake up every morning and feel like this is important, this is what matters, and this is what makes me feel alive. So it was very unique and special, especially that being the first ever Pod Summit YYC in Calgary. And I don't think I'll ever give that presentation quite in that way, but there's a lot of elements that were combined there because it was a personal journey. It was the circumstances that brought me there, to understand the why, and then some essential actual business takeaway or mindset in terms of how to build something new. So it's a very difficult question to answer if there was one. I don't know if there's one particular takeaway because that story had to be, all the components of that story had to be told in that way. And in fact, now since then, I've given a couple of presentations that I'm tailoring on the same concept. So the root of it will always be that. I think it's a huge part of the DNA of My Most Authentic Life and what the brand is. But I've gone to different audiences and, for example, told very shortened versions of the personal component, right? So yeah, I don't know if there's one in particular for that one.
My guess was that you were going to say that because when I was looking back and reflecting on your talk, and I was one of those who brought a notebook with me to Pod Summit and was madly writing down all the inspiration and ideas people were sharing, but I couldn't pick one. So I wanted to share with you some of the things that really resonated with me. So here you go. These are the things that really stuck with me. And one was how you talked about really owning your story. I love that idea. The importance of building relationships was another one. And I had noted down as well your keys to podcasting success. And these I've actually looked back at a few times over the course of the fall as things have got a little crazy here and there, just in other parts of my life, and sort of reconnecting with my why and why I love to do this so much. But success starts with you, beyond the downloads. That's a big one. Get in the room. Success is messy. It so is. Small steps, big wins, and have fun. And I've gone back to that list a number of times as I'm like, how am I going to fit this into my life? And how am I going to do this? And why am I doing this? And is it really having the impact that I'm wanting it to have? But that list that you shared, it's very grounding and very helpful. So thank you.
Oh, thank you. I'm glad it resonated. And that list is funny because I think I said it in the presentation and I've said it a couple other times, like I said, since I presented after. They could be applied to so many things because I believe the slide was the keys to podcasting success. And it could be the keys to leadership success, entrepreneurship success, but really overall, they all fall under the life success, right? You could really change that word for a few things.
So I'm curious, sort of from that, like you've created this brand and this podcast of My Authentic Life. What is My Authentic Life all about? What does that mean to you?
Yeah, and like I said earlier, it's kind of wild actually. Like that now it's a brand. Now we're talking about it as a brand. When it started as a desire to start a podcast, something I've always wanted to do since I was in university, actually, when I was at the creative school at TMU, the radio and television arts program. We had a radio show in first year, and we all took turns doing different parts of the radio show production, including hosting and everything else. And that was just something that, going back to that experience, I was like, oh, one day I felt like that was an unresolved thing. And then to think that then you start a DIY, you buy a starter mic, and you just start doing it. And then it has developed into a brand, right? Because I started to very timidly in those early days, afraid of almost talking about this stuff, right? Because I'm like, that's silly. Like, no one talks about this. It's just like, what are people going to think? But I kept pushing through those saboteurs and just kept embracing my imperfect self. And then it was empowering because you realize you're not alone. And it was never really about starting to tell people what authenticity is or to be a thought leader on it and own it that way. It was actually to kind of make sense of the mess. It was kind of to make sense of the post-pandemic mess and try to figure out, bounce ideas off people. My guests say that it's kind of therapy in a good way. Sometimes the questions I ask that no one's ever asked them, or they haven't been asked that in years. It was equally therapeutic for me. So then as that gains traction, and I realize I'm not alone and that people are connecting with the content, then I'm more aware about taking that raw emotion, that raw experience, and transforming it into whatever it is beyond the podcast, whether it's a social media post, a talk. Then all of a sudden the brand has different compartments and different shelves.
So do you have sort of a vision or a big lofty goal or something that you're heading towards? Or what are some of the things that are coming up next with you in sort of developing your brand?
Yes, it's a work in progress. It's beautiful how this has all evolved because, like I said, if you had told me 2019 that this would be a podcast, I wouldn't have believed it. If you would have told me that I'm actively on LinkedIn doing personal growth posts, I also wouldn't have believed it because I was timid or afraid to be out there and put myself out there. So the vision or the clarity that for sure, the bigger picture is that I want to tell different aspects of this story of my most authentic life on different platforms. And as an entrepreneur, a solopreneur, I have limited time and limited resources. So for now, I think I'm closing off 2024. I'm so proud of myself, I guess, pat on the back that I've been able to be so present with one person doing everything, right? So my bigger picture vision is to continue to be present on different platforms. If that makes sense. And from that, other things will come.
Yes, I love that. As one person, that is a huge undertaking.
You know it very well. It's a lot. Just the podcast itself,
yes,
is a lot of work. So you start adding all the other platforms, and then, yeah, it's a lot of time.
Now, in your experience, I'm curious what some common misconceptions might be around taking an unconventional path, whether that's in podcasting or entrepreneurship or really anything at all. Taking that path that's not really necessarily the one that everyone else is taking.
What are some misconceptions of the unconventional path? Yeah, the misconceptions are that one that comes to mind right away is that it doesn't have to be so unconventional. It's whatever works within you can be unconventional within what you may think is status quo or whatever the societal word of it is to label it. You can be very unconventional. For me, it sounds exotic, moving to a beach and then starting a podcast. those were the circumstances of my own personal journey. If things had played out differently, maybe, actually moving to Mexico wasn't my first choice. It sounds like like a great choice, a fun choice, but it wasn't really my first choice. But you don't have to uproot your life. You don't have to sell your house and upend everything that way. You can be very unconventional within the day-to-day routine.
So I know anytime I've sort of made a shift, whether sort of externally motivated, like I'm in a circumstance or situation and need to respond in some way, or something within myself that sort of feels like it's time for a change. It's time to shake things up a little bit, which I'll have to say is actually like right about now again. But I'm wondering, you mentioned like on your podcast, you ask people questions and they appreciate those questions, those good questions, right? Because they get you to reflect and think about things in a way that maybe you wouldn't otherwise, because we tend to kind of get in our own head and we're looking at things in a certain way. So aside from these great questions that you ask people, and I've heard you ask them on your podcast, what are some other ways that people maybe some ideas you have to support people or encourage people to lean into that uncertainty and maybe take the leap and take those steps in a different direction?
This is a very good question. It happens with baby steps. I always like this example, and I heard this even before I went on my personal growth journey. I've come back to it. It's like if you're going to start doing yoga, right? Buy the mat. At least that's the first step, right? Or reframe it and you can do it without a mat. There's one step you can take every day. So for me, the personal development work, because I worked with a life coach during that time, during my career break, and I took that very seriously. And that was an amazing experience that allowed me to just lean into the unknown. Part of it is realizing that it doesn't have to be perfect. Better done over perfect, right? It doesn't mean you don't own your work and take it seriously, but it's never going to be the version of perfect that you imagine it will be or that you want it to be. And sometimes you get surprised. You put something out there you that comes from an intentional place, that comes from the heart, and then that will resonate with someone. It doesn't matter how fancy the graphic is or how well edited it is or what camera you're using.
That's such great advice, because it's so easy to get stuck in thinking about sort of that end point that you're heading, that you lose sight of those, just taking that little next step, and also the perfectionist piece, right? It can be so hard to put something out there. You get so caught up on noticing, oh, I should just change this or tweak this or adjust this. And then sometimes it never happens. It never ends up out there in the world. I don't know about you, but when I listen back to some of my first podcast episodes, I think, maybe no, I'm going to just leave them out in the world. Like it speaks to that journey, right, that we go on.
And what's amazing, actually, I'm glad you said that, is because there's two sides to that. And recently I've been appreciating the other side. So one is, yes, the expression, you're only as good as your last podcast episode. And it's progressively sounds better. And of course, the interview skills and just knowing how to interview to keep the conversation and the story going. But I've been pleasantly surprised going back sometimes to episodes deep in the archives and realizing that the instinct was there as well. There was actually something so nice about those early episodes. Yeah, the sound design wasn't as great and stuff like that, but the core, the heart of it was there.
And now you've just made me feel better.
You're going to go listen to some of them.
Yeah. And I think you're right. The core is there. And there was a genuine excitement and interest in giving it a try. But those less important things like sound quality and that kind of thing definitely has gotten better over time. Although, believe me, there have been hiccups and things along the way despite that. But yeah, I love that. Thinking back to the heart of what you were putting out there. Now, I wanted to kind of build on that a little bit, because putting yourself out there in the world, as we're sort of talking about, can be really tough. And I'm wondering how you think about authenticity and vulnerability helping to sort of redefine success. And I know if you're somebody who's looking to kind of put yourself out there in the world and build an authentic personal brand, how do authenticity and vulnerability intermix or be a part of that?
Yeah, they're absolutely intertwined, because vulnerability is with allowing yourself to be exposed and not necessarily revealing deep, deep, dark secrets, right? That's not necessarily being vulnerable, but being raw and putting yourself out there before you think it's perfect. So they're definitely connected, both of them. Yeah.
And what does it mean to you to be authentic?
I love that. Thank you. I ask everybody that question. And every time someone asks me, I still kind of stop and I'm like, what is my definition?
I'm like, I'm going to throw it in there because I know you do.
But I feel like I should have a more polished, prepared answer, because I was actually like asked that recently. I was like, it caught me off guard. I'm like, but I know what it is. But anyways, in a nutshell, for me, and this is after all of this, I'm becoming obsessed with authenticity now for 2.5 years. It's the simplest definition. It's alignment for me. And you could just stop there, and then there's many other longer answers to that, because from alignment comes being present, being in the moment, and the more you practice, it's a challenge every day, right? To be there for everything, every commitment that comes up. But if you are, the more that you are, then that opens up other things. You notice little details that you may not have noticed if you're distracted or thinking about the next thing that you're going to do. So alignment has so many different positive aspects of it. Being present feels like home. It feels comfortable. And when you have all of that, when you feel like you're at home, when you feel comfortable, then your most authentic self can shine through. So authenticity is alignment.
I love that. And I think that's a great answer.
Thank you.
To your own question.
To my own question.
Back to podcasting here for a moment and its connection to leadership. Mm-hmm. So it is such an interesting way and a platform for leaders to connect with an audience. I was curious your thoughts on how podcasting can help leaders build a purpose-driven brand that will really resonate and connect with people.
Yes, I love this word leadership, because I've been looking at it from different ways. And working in corporate for so long, you're conditioned to build and groom those leadership skills, right? Which are crucial, of course, and everybody needs to tap into those. The part of the personal growth journey is that we forget that actually the most important resources are inner leadership. And I think that's where it has to start, actually. You can learn everything about the macro leadership and the technical aspects of it, and that's great. But it's not until you hone in the inner leadership that both can be in sync. So I think any great leader needs to take a sabbatical, needs to take a career break, needs to go put themselves out of their comfort zone, out of their bubble, dance in other ecosystems, and do some personal growth work. And then with that experience, come back to the broader leadership and build a brand that way. It just comes across as more authentic when those two are in sync.
So do you have any leaders that come to mind, or someone that you really resonate with or really admire who has a podcast and who uses their podcast in a way that really speaks to who they are and the leader that they are?
Oh, wow. You've put me on the spot with this one. There are so many. I almost don't know. I have no idea where to start, because there's so many different personal growth podcasts that have inspired me, but there's also non-personal growth podcasts that are the creator is owning their story. Going back to that, when you own your story, it really comes across, and so it shines through the power of the stories they're telling. Because sometimes change makers, anybody who's being brave enough to create content that is going to have social impact, that's showing tremendous empathy and leadership And that just comes across really strongly. So there's two sides. There's like the inspiring conversations I hear on personal growth podcasts. I have a long list. But then there's those narrative podcasts that do case studies or give vulnerable groups a voice or raise social impact issues. Those are really important as well.
Yeah, there's so many amazing podcasts.
Yeah, sorry if I didn't answer. Do you want me to give you a specific one? I didn't want to.
If you can think of if a specific one comes to mind, but I love sort of the essence of what it is you love about a podcast of someone who is sort of in that leadership position. But if a specific one comes to mind, that's awesome.
Well,
if not,
I mean, if there's one right off the top, I think it would be like the School of Greatness. I love the guests, right? There's always like these. And it's not like I listen to every episode, I have to say, but there's conversations that stay with you. And there's actually an episode with John Maxwell on leadership that I've gone back to and listened to. And that particular episode, so it's not even just the host that does a good job at making people feel comfortable and getting the right answers, but it's some of the topics that are covered. In that specific episode, if people want to Google it, on leadership, has so many interesting takeaways about leadership being someone that brings people together, not divides, creating positive team cultures. And yeah, I can't quite recite everything that was said, but it's just like, I go back to it for inspiration sometimes.
Oh, that sounds like a great episode. I will look it up and I'll share a link to that specific episode in the show notes. And I definitely want to give that a listen. That's a type of leader and leadership that I for sure resonate with. And I think in a world that can kind of feel quite divisive at times, I think somebody that's more about bringing people together and having conversations and creating that positive culture is so very needed. So
now that I'm thinking of all of them, Atomic Habits, James Clear. Yeah, he was a guest on How to Be a Better Human. That was a really good episode as well. And yeah, so anyways, I can't get into minutia now, different episodes, but
well, if more come to mind, if you don't mind sending me your list, because then I will just add them to my playlist because these all sound fantastic. So social media, a great tool of connection. It can also have its issues and challenges, of course, but podcasting as far as a tool for connection, I'm wondering your thoughts on using podcasting as a way to build connections and community and relationships with an audience and with a group of people.
Yes. So this is really relevant right now. I saw someone post on LinkedIn, someone within the podcasting industry, and this resonated, and this is what I've been trying to articulate in a way. So is this for myself, because I really resonated with it, that the podcasting as the actual medium, that's why I've said, in that slide, go beyond the downloads. It's beyond the downloads. I've always kind of had that gut feeling, but it's what this post was saying is that it's about the influence. And it's absolutely true, because it gives you a remarkable tool to be out there every day, if you want to, in different compartments, like I said, the different shelves of content, building your brand and building that messaging. It doesn't have to necessarily translate to, these downloads within 7 days and constantly checking the dashboard. Eventually people will find it, and they will get there, especially if you're creating content that is evergreen, doesn't have to be so actionable right away. Then people will find it, and you're creating this body of work that lives there. The influence or the impact that you can have by customizing the key takeaways from that content and placing them on different shelves, different content shelves.
Yeah, and it's so true. It's out there and people can access it and listen to episodes from years past and months past.
And also that podcasters are, so trusted now, versus other forms of media. It's credibility and awareness.
Now, your podcast, we've talked about a little bit, and it being all about exploring big changes and unconventional paths. So if a listener were to tune into your podcast, what would they expect to hear?
Yeah, it's interesting. I have a few content pillars that are a big part. So obviously they all intertwine. So yeah, it's about people on a journey to live their most authentic life. Of course, the play on the title is we never really get there. We're on this journey, and maybe every new version of ourselves will be closer to, but that's the beauty of it, right? Trying to get there. And people that have taken an interesting life pivot have reinvented themselves. So that's, the unconventional part, the big changes, big life changes they've made. But especially post-pandemic, and what inspired this podcast was that it came from a mental health low point for me. After the pandemic, all of a sudden, it's after my job finished, all this time to fill, lockdown, a year of lockdown, and that the mental health journey is intertwined with big life changes and unconventional paths. They're all interlinked, right? So that's another huge part of it, is the mental health journey. And then, of course, me being born in Mexico and raised in Canada, during the pandemic, through the inner work that I did, was trying to go inward to understand more of the dual cultures. And you don't really even have to be from dual cultures to understand that we're always living in this in-betweenness. So there, I guess, are literally, two cultures, but there are others that they just have two selves that they're trying to navigate in life. So those are the different kind of content pillars: authenticity, unconventional paths, big changes, mental health journey, and being transparent and destigmatizing these topics. Because I've had some very intense conversations on the podcast that just feel natural. 2.5 years ago, it would have been like, wow, I can't believe, I can't talk about that. But once you start normalizing it, you're sharing it, and somebody else is going to have an important takeaway from it.
And the thing I love too about podcasting, and I love how you're bringing people on and really diving into their stories and who they are and getting into some of those difficult topics, is you never really know exactly who's listening and the impact that you have, but sometimes you do, and you find that out, even down the road. And, sometimes people might be going through their own difficult time and looking at perhaps needing to or wanting to head down that unconventional path, and to have right in their ear somebody sharing their story and their journey with that, and some of the mental health challenges or whatnot that might have been a part of that, can, I think, in many cases make us or whomever is going through that not feel so alone. There's other people going through experiences like that as well.
And what I like about the way it's evolved with my podcast is that it doesn't have to be so beat you over the head with it either. Like, it's part of the DNA of the podcast, and it doesn't have to be mental health awareness when we talk about that. And there are some specific stories where the guests actually want to share very specific, and the episode is about that, right? But in the majority, I would say it's just interwoven in a very natural and organic way to show you that we don't have to also just have to make a huge deal about it all the time. It's just part of our daily lives.
Yeah, those true, authentic conversations with people about their stories and who they are. I do really love that. Now, on a personal note, I'm curious who might be a favorite teacher that you've had along your journey. And this could be a classroom teacher, it could be a mentor, a coach, somebody you've worked with. So somebody who has taught you something that's been really impactful. And I'm curious why that person really means so much to you.
Wow. This is a very timely question, and something I've been aware of and reflecting recently. It's interesting how mentorship figures in your life come in and out. And the best possible mentors, just like, a good friend that you haven't seen in years, you can just kind of pick up exactly where you left off. The comfort level is there, the humor is there, and it comes from that shared history. So I feel grateful that I have, over the course of my life, I've had mentors that have been very active at certain parts of my life. So I can think of one person specifically that believed that I could be a salesperson before I even knew. And it was actually, he knew way before, and kind of let me discover it on my own, that I had all the skill set and the personality and the ability to be successful at it. and was able to nurture talent. So yeah, there was a mentor that gave me a lot of opportunities early in my career, and that opened up my entire sales career, and it led to those 15 years. They ended up with burnout long after he was gone, but they did build the foundation for what ended up being a very remarkable chapter in my life. And now we've reconnected in this new phase, and it's all happened so organically. And it's not like he's mentoring me again directly, but it's just the presence, right? Because now we're at a different stage of the interaction. It just feels safe to know that someone's out there in case you really needed to reach out and ask an important question, right? But the mentor is so important because they see you, they let you know they're listening without really doing anything. So it's a presence, but I feel really that's been a big part of my journey, actually, the coming full circle and moving back to Canada and reconnecting with this mentor, because it's grounded me and brought more stability into my life. And it really feels like, okay, it's Fede 2.0 or whatever it is, but with a connection to that past. And so if it's one layer of many other things that are going on in my life that makes it feel complete.
You sound like an incredible individual.
Yes, definitely.
Now, when you look back at your journey so far, what would be something that you're the most proud of?
Well, it's simple. I haven't always been able to own it, but I'm an advocate at heart, and I realize that advocacy has been a huge part of what I do, even when it hasn't been so clear. Raising my voice, standing in my truth, it hasn't always maybe been the right thing to do, or like publicly or popular, I should say. But as time reveals everything. And I didn't know that was part of my purpose before. And now I definitely do. And I'm owning it, because before, for some reason, I made a connection that there was a connotation that advocacy was like a negative thing, in a way of like angry. You have to be kind of like angry and trying to fix things and loud. And I'm like, that's not me. But actually, you can be the complete opposite. You can talk about warm, fuzzy personal growth aspects and kind of make an impact that way, or talk about mental health awareness. And you could do it with a smile, and you could be an optimist and a happy person. What am I most proud of? I think I'm most proud that I keep stepping into that and owning it more.
I love that. Now, 2 quick little questions. What is something that you would love to learn about, or something that you would love to learn how to do?
Oh, wow. This is an interesting question. I think I would want to embrace more of the physical adventure in life. I've always been a little like scared, I guess, of doing maybe, I'm just things that come off the top of my head, like jumping off a plane or something like that. Something that's a little bit more physically involved, versus some people may be hesitant to do a social media post. For some reason, I'm not scared to do that anymore. I don't overthink it, but something that pushes my physical limits without going over the top. Something that and with that, you connect with nature a bit more. Something that would be outdoorsy and connect with nature, and that gets you out of your home.
So next year when I see you at PodSummit, I can't wait to hear about your physical outdoor adventures.
Goodness. Now, yeah,
exactly. No pressure, no pressure. If you could sit down and have a conversation with somebody that you would love to learn from, who would it be and why?
Ooh, it would be like, I would love to have a conversation with the classics, like Gandhi or Nelson Mandela. I've just heard about Nelson Mandela's friendships that he made, actually, with the guards and over those years. And it's like, wow, it's just so touching, right? That he would go through all of that and still have that positive mindset.
Now, education plays a huge part in all aspects of our lives. So it's a part of work and play and podcasting and building relationships. And I'm wondering if you have any final thoughts or words of wisdom to share with people that might support or empower them in their own teaching and learning journeys?
Yes. You never stop learning. That's the biggest thing I've realized. It's an ongoing thing in your life, even when you don't know that you're doing it. And it's both the practical and the actual books that, so you need a balance of that. A huge part of it is the application of it. And it's interesting with my own podcasting journey that it was trial and error, right? The music wasn't perfect. The artwork has evolved. The interview skills have evolved. And there's this big thing, actually. So I was at the Future Makers conference that happened here in Toronto in the fall. And one of the big themes that was echoed in a lot of the different presentations was testing, tinkering, and failing. And that is basically what we're doing throughout life. And it's like going back to the 1% of improving 1% per day. How amazing, if you could give yourself the luxury to fail 99 times and be okay with it. Wow, today I'm going to go out and I'm going to fail 99 times and that be like a learning opportunity, an educational opportunity versus a downside. So yes, I hope that answers your question.
Mm-hmm. There is so much to be learned through failure because we have to try something new and different and kind of, in a way, go outside of our comfort zone. That's when failure tends to happen. We can be successful at things that we're super comfortable with. And I recently learned that Sarah Blakely, the founder of Spanx, growing up, when her family would sit around the dinner table, everyone would have to share what they failed at that day.
Oh, wow. I love that.
And it was like celebrated. And I was thinking, that might be a good thing to add into my family's dinner conversation.
Yeah. Well, there was a time in my life that I was a huge baseball fan when I was younger. For some reason, baseball has gone out of my life now, but there's a lot of personal growth reframes in baseball, believe it or not. So it's just like, it's just like the statistics that if you're like a 300 hitter in baseball, that's 3 out of 10. That means you're failing 7 times and you're considered one of the best in the game. And there's 162 games, just like the game of life. It's a marathon. And that if you win 60% of the time, you're considered a legendary team. And so when you put it in perspective that way, it's just like there's a lot of beauty in the failing.
There is a lot of beauty in the failing. Fede, I want to thank you so very much for joining me today and sharing your time and stories and all your words of wisdom. If our listeners want to find out more about you and all the things that you're up to, where are the best places to find you?
Well, Tiana, thank you so much. This has been so much fun. I love being on people's guests because it's therapeutic for me as well. And I love all the thoughtful questions. Thank you so much. And people can find my podcast, My Most Authentic Life. They can follow me around the web. That's the handle. And that's also the website, mymostauthenticlife.com.
Amazing. Thank you so very much for joining me today. It was great to connect with you and to learn from you.
Thank you so much.